When the construction of our new home began, my husband lost his job. He had promised to pay half the mortgage, even if it meant taking part-time jobs, but ended up neither re-employing nor working at all. As the new house was completed, my husband suggested something outrageous.
I've decided to give this house as a wedding present to my adorable niece. We can always buy another house. If you oppose my idea, we should divorce immediately.
What? I was shocked, but knew his secret, so I readily agreed to divorce if that's what he wanted. John smirked, thinking he had his way. He quickly filed for divorce and then asked about the division of property. Revealing that I knew his secret changed his attitude dramatically. With the support of someone else, his plan took an unexpected turn, leading to an incredible situation. We were a couple 3 years into our marriage. Next year, I will turn 30, and my husband in his mid-30s discussed whether we should have children. Considering the physical demands of childbirth and the uncertainty of maintaining our current health, I wanted to have children before my mid-30s and consulted my husband. He suggested there was no need to rush into having children if it seemed too much. Then he expressed his desire for children, but acknowledged our current home was too small for a family, proposing we consider buying our own house. Raising children requires substantial financial resources, and buying a home could mean nearly 30 years of mortgage payments. By then, my husband would be in his mid-60s, likely retired. I did not want to burden our children with financial difficulties. My mother worked full-time while raising me and managing household chores, supporting my father and me until her retirement. I always admired her and decided to work while keeping a home. With this resolve, we carefully planned for our home, choosing a builder and setting our new home project in motion. Fortunately, we had savings, so we decided to make a larger down payment to avoid future mortgage struggles. Just as things were coming together, my husband's company went bankrupt, and he lost his job without receiving any severance pay. I asked him if there were any signs of the company's impending failure, but he snapped back, saying he couldn't have known since he wasn't an executive. One morning, he was unexpectedly barred from entering his workplace, with only a notice stating the company had gone bankrupt the day before. It was a small company, and it seemed the president and other responsible parties had fled overnight, leaving no severance or even that month's salary. Given the uncertain future, I suggested we reconsider the home purchase, but my husband insisted on proceeding since we had come so far. Driven by his determination to find a new job without being picky, I agreed to put the plan on hold. He was optimistic about quickly finding a new job. We decided to continue our plan once he secured a new job. He started visiting the job center and searching for jobs online enthusiastically. My husband also found some temporary work while looking for a permanent position, although it was on a call basis and unpredictable. His actions and commitment to sharing the mortgage payments reassured me. Since my income was stable and we could manage without his contribution for the time being, I decided to move forward with our home project. Up to this point, my husband might seem dedicated and responsible. However, he had an unusual obsession with his niece, the daughter of his much older sister. She had her child young, and my husband, becoming an uncle early, doted on his niece excessively. Despite living far away and rare visits, he often sent expensive gifts and gave her money far beyond the norm, even once giving her a Christmas present of $1,000, which I found excessive. When we faced unexpected expenses, he prioritized gifts for his niece over our budget, which made me question his priorities. His indulgence towards his niece often left me dismayed. Now, unemployed, he didn't spend our savings on his niece but spent long hours outside, supposedly job hunting, returning home later than when he was employed. His eagerness to find a job was commendable, but he became negligent about our home project, leaving all decisions to me. He arrogantly asked me to handle all the paperwork, only wanting his name on the joint ownership. I gently reminded him to show some interest in our home, to which he responded with frustration, citing his job search exhaustion. I worried that he might later argue that since I made all the decisions, I should be responsible for the mortgage payments. When I brought up the payment arrangements, he wanted to keep his personal savings intact until he found a job, prioritizing future emergencies over current needs. He insisted on leaving the mortgage payments to me for the time being, a proposal far too convenient for him compared to our initial agreement. I demanded he sign a loan agreement for the period I'd cover the mortgage, feeling the need to assert myself. He continued to complain, but reluctantly agreed when he realized pressing him on his job search might complicate matters. John will repay half of the mortgage payments I made during his unemployment once he is re-employed. I got his signature on this agreement and stored it securely where he wouldn't find it. Despite this, there were numerous instances where the promises we initially made fell apart until the completion of our new home. First, John, who had said he would find a job quickly and wouldn't be picky, failed to secure employment as the completion of our new home approached. Moreover, he declined several offers from the temp agency he registered with, making various excuses. I hated the idea of supporting a husband who made no effort, so I pressed him to find a job many times, but he always dodged the issue, leading to more arguments. While this was happening, our new home was finally completed and ready to move into. However, with things as they were, moving in, let alone living with John, seemed difficult. In fact, I had gathered various pieces of information since he was laid off. Including his continued failure to find work, there were many things I wanted to confirm and discuss. As usual, when John was leaving for the job center, I approached him. "I want you to spend today with me. There's something important I want to discuss," I told him. John tried to avoid the conversation, saying that finding a job was his top priority and we could talk another time. Insisting that missing one day at the job center wouldn't matter since it's unclear if he even had any interviews, I refused to back down, demanding he listen to me. Then John said something outrageous.
"A nagging woman isn't cute, you know."
"What?"
"Actually, I have something to tell you too. I thought I could wait, but since it's good news, now is a good time. My niece is getting married, so I've decided to give that new home to her. We can split the mortgage and keep paying it together."
"What?" I had been dumbfounded by his excessive way of spoiling and spending on his niece before, but gifting an entire house? Why would he make such a significant decision without discussing it with me first? This was the first I heard of his niece getting married. "I haven't agreed to this. Do you think this is something you can just decide on your own?" I pressed him. Then John threatened divorce if I disagreed. He brought up the idea of building a new home, yet there has been no progress while he remained unemployed. But he kept making uncertain promises about finding work. Despite sounding plausible, his actions did not match. I laughed in disbelief at his words. So I had anticipated his ridiculous idea of gifting an entire house to his niece. Surely that matter must be related. Still curious about how he would respond, I bombarded him with questions. "Are you serious? You're unemployed. You're gifting a house with an outstanding mortgage to your niece? Do you think she would be happy with such a thing? How could one even come up with the idea of giving away a house for which we're paying a 30-year mortgage? Moreover, giving a house with an unpaid mortgage as a celebration seems like passing on a burden, which is just outrageous." I also pressed him on what this meant for our plans to start a family, given we bought the house for when our family grows. John responded defiantly to my questions, saying he wouldn't be troubled by a divorce. He dodged all my questions, merely threatening divorce without explaining himself. It was as if we were not even the same species, with conversation impossible. There were many things I had intended to discuss, but it seemed John was far more unreasonable than I had anticipated. I had been thinking of bringing up divorce myself, so I readily accepted his proposal.
"If you agree to my terms, including leaving the house and finalizing our divorce, I will listen to anything,"
John said. "So you can file the divorce papers first, but I want to settle the division of property after the divorce is officially finalized. I also want to prepare for living on my own, so let's settle everything once you've calmed down," I told him. John agreed, saying he would follow my wishes as long as he could file for divorce immediately. In reality, my desire to prepare for living alone was a pretext. There was something else I needed to do. I told John I needed time to prepare for living alone as a way to buy time without him finding out. After a while, having completed everything I had left unfinished, I was waiting for the right moment to contact John. Then, perhaps growing impatient, or having discovered something, he contacted me first.
"What's going on? Why is our new home being listed for sale? That was supposed to be a gift for my niece, and it's our joint property to begin with. If you're doing things your way, I won't pay the mortgage." He was furious over the phone, accusing me of selling our jointly owned home without his knowledge and refusing to listen to anything I had to say. After letting him vent, I responded, "I knew you were trying to push all the payments onto me.
Did you really think it was still jointly owned? You were so keen on divorcing. I thought you'd have checked that part carefully. Indeed, when he insisted on joint ownership, it was set up that way. However, suspecting he would eventually avoid all payments and claim the house as his own, I changed the ownership due to my distrust when he started acting strangely after the house was completed. Thinking he would reveal his true intentions then, he stubbornly insisted the house was for his niece, convinced he hadn't been found out. So I paid off the entire mortgage with my savings. Unknown to John, my parents had sold land inherited from my grandfather to provide cash to help with the payment. My parents always advocated for buying outright rather than taking loans, which they saw as uncertain and risky. They financially supported me so I could pay for the house in full. I had considered following their advice, but then John lost his job. Fearing he'd become even more irresponsible if he knew about the money, I kept silent. Moreover, I doubted he'd repay me if I covered the entire cost. I hadn't told him, not wanting to trample on my parents' generosity. John was furious upon discovering the ownership change and accused me of breaking our promise to keep the house. The house is still there, isn't it? It's not destroyed, and it's livable, right? If it ends up in someone else's hands, that doesn't concern you. If you really want it, you can buy it back. It was my right to do as I pleased with the house I fully paid for, though living in a home planned with an ex-husband felt wrong. John, frustrated by what I had said, claimed he had a right to part of the proceeds as marital property. He demanded an immediate share, promising to check the exact amount later. I invited him to meet, saying I had more to tell him. I arrived early at the designated spot, waiting for him. When John arrived and began to speak, I showed him something that made him halt mid-sentence: the results of a private investigator's inquiry into his conduct. The report included evidence of his affair, with prominent photos of him kissing another woman in public, dining at expensive restaurants, and entering hotels. It detailed that although John had initially job hunted after his layoff, he soon began seeing the other woman regularly, claiming to be single and struggling to find work due to the recession, eliciting her sympathy. He not only sought her pity, but also convicted her of his financial desperation, leading her to support him financially, essentially acting like a con artist, proposing marriage. I felt sick learning he escalated divorce talks because he was fed up with everything, including discussions about the mortgage and his uncooperative attitude. The other woman, sympathetic and compliant, was easier for him to manipulate than me, planning to switch to her from me. The story about gifting the house was just a tactic to expedite our divorce, a reason he thought he could use if I refused. But he was mistaken in thinking he had manipulated me. In reality, I was the one orchestrating everything. I had hired a private investigator when I noticed John's strange behavior and was aware of his infidelity. His excuse of gifting the house to his niece was unexpected, but I had already decided to divorce him upon learning of his affair. I wanted to discuss this matter with John before moving into our new home. Initially, I planned to confront him about his infidelity and declare my intention to divorce. However, observing his irrational behavior, I realized he was incapable of reasonable conversation. So I decided to let him think he had his way while I planned my next steps in the background. Holding all the evidence, I confronted John. I have solid evidence of your affair. With all this proof, you can't talk your way out of it. I'll be demanding compensation from you.
You knew and kept quiet? What kind of woman does that make you, staying silent about her beloved husband's infidelity?
Beloved? Besides, the one who betrayed me was you, right? John's claim of a beloved husband was so absurd that I couldn't help but scoff. As I retorted, he stumbled over his words before insisting again on his right to a share of the assets. That's when I made a call to John's father, my last resort. I informed him that John was demanding a division of assets. John started ranting about why I needed to involve his father, but when I told him his father wanted to speak with him, his rants stopped abruptly. Putting the phone on speaker, I handed it to John, so he could hear his father reprimanding him. His father scolded him for his behavior, asking how a man in his 30s could act so shamefully and criticizing him for causing family breakdown, yet demanding a share of assets. John has always had a tough relationship with his father, unable to defy him since childhood. His father absolutely hates dishonesty and particularly loathes those who hurt or deceive others. After John proposed divorce, I immediately sought advice from John's father, asking for help if I couldn't resolve it myself. He supported me, saying to discard a cheating husband and promising to confront John himself. However, I had many things I wanted to say to John myself, fearing he might run away if his father intervened. I had kept silent. My reason for wanting time after our divorce was partly to coordinate with John's father and to ensure John didn't discover the house sale. Moreover, I wanted to clarify John's relationship with his niece and made a call to John's sister in front of John's father. I asked her directly if her daughter had ever received expensive gifts or large sums of money from John, to which she replied no. John's sister mentioned that even during birthdays when John was invited, he never brought presents, only cheap cars. My niece had no idea about the supposed marriage or the house gift, finding it absurd and unwanted. John's father and John's sister were also unaware of John's supposed doting on his niece. Where had all the money John claimed to spend on his niece gone? John's sister then shared valuable information about John's past. When he was 20, during a police raid at an illegal casino, he was detained. Fearing his strict father's reaction, John had pleaded with his mother to keep it secret, admitting to gambling away valuable items for cash. Despite promising to quit, his addiction seemed pathological. John's father confirmed missing items from their storage, confronting John about his gambling under the guise of caring for his niece.
Using your niece as a cover for your gambling? You gamble despite being unemployed? The asset division is not for funding your bets.
He ordered John to return home for a stern re-education. Unable to defy his father, John conceded, renouncing any claims to assets and agreeing to pay compensation. Following John's father's intervention, a lawyer he arranged for me confirmed that John had officially renounced his claim to any shared property, allowing me to acquire all communal assets. Additionally, through John's father's consideration, I received a lump sum of inconvenience fee from John, significantly above the standard rate. At first, I harbored resentment towards John's affair partner. However, as the investigation into John's behavior extended to her, my feelings shifted. She believed John was single and struggling financially, and despite her own financial hardships, she had given him money. It became clear to me that she too was a victim of John's manipulation. Despite being deceived herself, she expressed remorse for potentially disrupting my family and tearfully apologized. She even offered a small sum of money as compensation, which I refused, appreciating her sentiment enough. I informed her that as another victim of John's deceit, she might be entitled to some compensation, explaining that his promises of marriage, coupled with financial demands, could constitute fraud. She took immediate action upon this advice. When she confronted John at his parents' house, accusing him of deception using marriage as bait, John's father became furious. He suggested she could file a police report and demanded John immediately turn himself in, causing quite a commotion. John begged for forgiveness from both his affair partner and his father, pledging to return all the money he had swindled in an attempt to avoid police involvement. His scant savings were completely depleted in paying back his affair partner and covering the damages, leaving him penniless. Recently retired, John's father had plenty of time to closely monitor John, applying strict supervision that made even a prison seem lenient by comparison. John's attempts to escape the surveillance were short-lived. Hunger drove him back to his father's doorstep within 2 days. John's father, dismayed by John's lack of resolve whether to stay or flee, disowned him after declaring his disappointment. John, now homeless and without a penny, broke into his family's storage, repeating his past actions of stealing valuables. However, John's father, forewarned by past incidents, had since fortified the storage with surveillance and security contracts, leading to John's prompt apprehension by the police upon his attempt theft. With his mother passed away, his sister enraged by his exploitation of her daughter, and his father refusing to bail him out, insisting jail might reform him, John found himself without anyone to rely on. I too declined any involvement, emphasizing our estrangement. Now, with the house sold and the proceeds in hand, I plan to invest in some much-needed personal rejuvenation. I've managed to rent a top-floor apartment in a building I've always wanted to live in. From here, I look forward to enjoying the view, treating myself to good food, and appreciating the time spent away from John, acknowledging the years endured together.